The night I destroyed my marriage, I was wearing the dress my husband bought me. I remember that detail so clearly. Deep green silk. He'd handed me the box that morning, kissed my forehead, and said, "Wear this tonight. I want everyone to see how beautiful my wife is." He had no idea that by the end of that night, everyone in that room would see something else entirely. They'd see the truth. About him. About my sister. And about the woman they all thought was too quiet to fight back. For 4 months, I had smiled at the man who was betraying me. I had passed the salt to the sister who was sleeping with him. I had signed nothing, said nothing, and cried only in the shower where the water covered the sound. They thought I didn't know. They thought that even if I did, I'd just fold, the way I always had. Quiet Claire, sweet Claire, the one who kept the peace, who never made a scene, who could be pushed and would only bend, never break. They forgot one thing. They forgot whose name was on 60% of that company. So no, I didn't scream when I found out. I didn't throw a glass or slap a face. I did something far more patient and far more dangerous. I waited. And on the night of our anniversary, in a room full of everyone we knew, I stood up right after my sister raised her glass to toast us, and I finally stopped being the quiet one. But to understand how I got there, how the woman who forgave everything finally decided to stop, I have to take you back 3 years, to the night I handed over my inheritance and thought I was building a future. My name is Claire, and for most of my life, being the calm one was my entire personality. I was the older sister who smoothed things over, the wife who never nagged, the daughter who called on Sundays. If there was tension in a room, I was the one who absorbed it, the way a sponge soaks up a spill so no one else has to feel it on their hands. I met Daniel when I was 28. He was charming in that easy way some men have. The kind of charm that makes you feel like the only person in the room, right up until you realize he makes everyone feel that way. Back then, I didn't see it as a warning. I saw it as warmth. He had big dreams and empty pockets. He wanted to build a company, a design and branding firm, something of his own. And I believed in him. God, I believed in him so completely that when my grandmother passed away and left me an inheritance, I didn't even hesitate. It was $140,000. My grandmother had scrimped and saved her entire life for it. She used to hold my hand and say, "Claire, this money is your freedom. Don't ever let anyone take your freedom." I think about those words now more than any others she ever said. But at 29, freshly in love and desperate to be part of something, I took that money, my freedom, and I poured every dollar of it into Daniel's company. I want to tell you I was naive, but I wasn't completely foolish. There was one moment, one single moment, where the quiet, careful part of me spoke up. We were sitting at the lawyer's office, signing the incorporation papers. Daniel had already filled everything out. He'd listed himself as the majority owner. 70% to him, 30% to me. And I looked at that number and something in my stomach tightened. I remember Daniel smiling at me across the table. "It's just a formality, babe. You know it's really 50-50. This is my baby, that's all." His baby. Funded entirely by my grandmother's life savings. I opened my mouth to agree, to smooth it over like I always did. But then I heard her voice. "Don't ever let anyone take your freedom." And for once, for one rare time in my life, I didn't fold. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "If it's my inheritance funding this, then it's my majority, 60-40, in my favor." The room went still. Daniel's smile flickered, just for a second. And in that flicker, I saw something I didn't have the wisdom to name back then. Now I know exactly what it was. It was calculation. Then the smile came back, wide and warm. Of course, you're right. 60-40. Whatever makes you comfortable, my love. The lawyer changed the paperwork. I signed, Daniel signed. And I remember driving home that day feeling faintly guilty, like I'd done something selfish, like I'd made a scene. I actually apologized to him in the car. Can you believe that? I apologized for protecting my own grandmother's money. Don't be silly, he said, squeezing my knee. I love that you stood up for yourself. I held on to that sentence for years. I love that you stood up for yourself. He didn't. Not really. He tolerated it because he had to. And somewhere in the back of his mind, I now believe, he filed it away as a problem to be solved later. The company was called Meridian Creative, and for the next 3 years, I gave it everything. I didn't just give it my money, I gave it my hands, my time, my sleep. In the early days, when we couldn't afford employees, I did the books. I answered the phones. I built the client spreadsheets, chased the invoices, wrote half the proposals that landed us our first real accounts. Daniel was the face. He was brilliant at that part, the pitches, the dinners, the charm. But I was the spine, the structure that held it all upright when he'd overpromise a client and vanish into a panic. By year 3, Meridian was actually successful. We had 11 employees, a real office downtown with big windows and my grandmother's photo on my desk. We were pulling in more money than either of us had ever imagined, and I was proud. I was so proud, I didn't notice the ground shifting under my feet. I didn't notice that Daniel had slowly, carefully started introducing himself as the founder. Singular. That in interviews, in meetings, in the little origin story he told at networking events, I had quietly become my wife who helps out. Helps out. 3 years of my life, my grandmother's freedom, and I had become a footnote in the story of my own company. But even that, I let slide. Because that was who I was, the one who kept the peace. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being the strong one for everybody else. You become so good at holding things together that no one ever thinks to ask if you're holding together. You disappear into your own usefulness. And into that loneliness, that year, walked the one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. My little sister, Emma. I need you to understand who Emma was to me. Our mother was difficult, cold, critical, quick with her disappointment and slow with her love. Growing up, I wasn't just Emma's older sister. I was her shield. I took the blame for things she broke. I stayed up helping her with homework. When our mother's words got too sharp, I stepped between them. I raised that girl as much as our mother ever did. So when Emma called me that spring, crying, saying she'd lost her job and her lease was ending and she had nowhere to go, I didn't hesitate. Just like I never hesitated with the inheritance. Come stay with us, I said. Stay as long as you need. Your family. Daniel, oddly, agreed right away. Enthusiastically, even. At the time, I thought, how sweet. He loves my sister like his own. God. I moved her into our guest room myself. I hung her clothes in the closet. I made up the bed with the good sheets. I even gave Daniel a little smile over her head and mouthed, "Thank you for being so generous." I was thanking him. I was setting the table for my own betrayal and thanking the man who'd planned the meal. That was 3 years of building and one open door. And behind that door, in a house I paid for, funded by an inheritance I'd fought to protect, the 2 people I loved most in the world were already beginning to plan a life that didn't include me. I just didn't know it yet, but I was about to. Because 2 weeks after Emma moved in, I found the first receipt. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were laundry days, and that's the only reason I found it at all. Daniel had thrown his suit jacket over the back of a kitchen chair, the charcoal one he wore to client dinners. I picked it up to hang it, and out of habit, I checked the pockets. He was always leaving receipts and business cards in them, little scraps I'd have to sort through before dry cleaning. My fingers closed around a slip of paper, and I pulled it out without thinking. It was a hotel receipt. The Ashford, downtown. A room. One night. 2 weeks earlier. And my first reaction? I want you to hear this because it tells you exactly who I was. My first reaction was to make an excuse for him. A client meeting, I thought. He probably booked a room for an out-of-town client. Or a late night and he didn't want to drive home. That's all. I actually smiled at my own suspicion, felt a little ashamed of it. I set the receipt on the counter, fully intending to hand it back to him and laugh about it. And then I saw the second line on the receipt. Room service, 2 glasses of champagne, strawberries, ordered at 11:40 at night. Something in me went very, very quiet. The way a house goes quiet right before the power flickers out. Because I knew Daniel. I knew him at the level where you stop noticing a person and start simply predicting them. And Daniel did not order 11:40 at night champagne and strawberries for a client. He ordered that for a woman he wanted to impress. I stood in my own kitchen, holding that receipt, and I felt the first crack run through the floor of my life. But, and this is the part I'm not proud of, I still didn't confront him. Because the calm one, the peacekeeper, the woman who smooths everything over, had one more excuse left in her. Maybe it's old, maybe it's from before, maybe I'm wrong. So I did something I had never done in my entire marriage. That night, when Daniel was in the shower, I picked up his phone. I told myself I just wanted to be reassured. I told myself I'd feel silly in a minute, and I'd put it down and never think about it again. His passcode was our anniversary. Of course it was. He was sentimental about the strangest things. I opened his messages. My hands weren't shaking yet. I scrolled past clients, past our employees, past the group chat with his college friends. And then I saw a thread with no name. Just a heart emoji where the contact name should be. I want to tell you I hesitated. I didn't. I opened it, and the room tilted. The messages went back months. Months. I read them the way you read something in a nightmare, fast and slow at the same time, each word arriving a beat after your eyes have already seen it. Last night was everything. I can't stop thinking about you. That was from him, my husband, to the heart emoji contact. And then the reply came, and I read it, and the floor I was standing on simply wasn't there anymore. Me neither. When are you finally going to tell her? I hate pretending at breakfast. Breakfast. The word hit me before the meaning did. Because there was only one woman who had breakfast at my table. Only one woman living under my roof, sitting across from me every single morning while I poured the coffee. My hand started shaking then. I scrolled up and up, praying I was wrong, praying it was someone, anyone else. And then I found a photo. It was Emma, my sister, in a bed I recognized, the guest bed, the one I'd made up with the good sheets. Wrapped in a towel, laughing at the camera, her hair wet. And underneath it, Daniel had written, "My future, not the past sleeping down the hall." The past, that was me. I was the past, sleeping down the hall, in my own house, funding all of it. I don't remember putting the phone down. I don't remember walking to the bathroom. But I remember sitting on the cold tile floor, my back against the tub, one hand pressed hard over my own mouth so no sound would escape. Because Daniel was in the next room. And Emma was just down the hall, in that bed, probably scrolling through her own version of those same messages. Let me tell you what betrayal actually feels like, because the movies get it wrong. It's not fireworks. It's not screaming. It's a strange, cold silence, like the moment after you've cut yourself deeply and the pain hasn't arrived yet. That horrible pause where your body knows something is very wrong, but hasn't decided how much it's going to hurt. I sat on that floor, and my mind didn't fill with rage. It filled with memories. Emma at 7, hiding behind me while our mother screamed. Emma at 16, sobbing on my shoulder over her first heartbreak, and me stroking her hair, promising her that one day a good man would love her right. Emma 3 weeks ago, hugging me in the doorway, thanking me through tears for saving her. Every memory I had of loving my sister was now poisoned, rewritten, because while I was making up her bed with the good sheets, she was already sleeping in it with my husband. And Daniel. Daniel's message played over and over in my skull. When are you finally going to tell her? Tell her. They had discussed it. This wasn't a drunken mistake, a one-night collapse of judgment. This was a plan, a future. They were waiting for the right moment to inform me that my marriage and my family were over. On their schedule, in their words. That was the moment something inside me changed. And I need you to understand because it's the whole reason for everything that came after. I did not decide to get revenge. Not yet. That came later, colder and clearer. What I decided, sitting on that bathroom floor, was much simpler. I decided that for the first time in my entire life, I was not going to react the way they expected me to. They expected tears, a scene. The quiet one finally shattering, sobbing, begging Daniel to stay, humiliating myself. They had a script for me, and Emma knew it best of all. She'd watched me play the peacekeeper our whole lives. So I made a decision on that floor that felt like stepping off a cliff. I decided to give them nothing. No tears they could see, no scene, no hint. I was going to walk out of that bathroom, and I was going to smile. I wiped my face. I ran the cold water and pressed my wet fingers to my eyes until the redness faded. I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. And I didn't recognize the calm woman staring back. But I liked her. Then I opened the door, walked into the living room where my husband sat scrolling on the phone that had just detonated my life. And I said, in the warmest voice I owned, "Hey, do you want tea before bed?" He looked up and smiled. "You're the best." "Yeah, thanks, babe." "I know," I said lightly. And I went to make him tea. That was the night I stopped being the past, sleeping down the hall. That was the night I started planning. Because here's what the two smartest people in my life had forgotten, in all their careful scheming. They'd built their entire future on top of a company. And that company was 60% mine. That first night, I lay next to Daniel in the dark and listened to him fall asleep. He slept like a man with a clear conscience. Deep, even breaths, one arm thrown over his face. Meanwhile, I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, my whole body rigid, running the same question through my mind over and over. Why aren't you screaming? Every instinct in me, every single one, wanted to shake him awake and demand answers. Wanted to walk down the hall, throw open that guest room door, and scream at my sister until my voice gave out. And I want to be honest with you about why I didn't. Because it wasn't strength. Not at first. At first, it was fear. I was afraid that if I confronted them that night, I would lose everything and get nothing. I'd get the satisfaction of yelling for about 10 minutes. And then what? Daniel would apologize, or he wouldn't. Emma would cry, or she wouldn't. And by morning, they'd have their story straight, their lawyers on speed dial, and I'd be the hysterical wife who flew off the handle. I'd seen it happen to other women. The moment you react, they get to make the story about your reaction instead of their betrayal. But somewhere in those long, dark hours, the fear cooled into something harder, something more useful: strategy. Because I realized that right now, right this second, I held the single most valuable thing in any conflict. They didn't know that I knew. That was power. Real power. As long as they believed their secret was safe, they would keep behaving normally. They wouldn't move money. They wouldn't lawyer up. They wouldn't hide documents or rush their plans. They'd stay comfortable. And comfortable people get sloppy. So I made myself a promise in the dark. I was going to become the best actress I had ever been. I was going to smile and cook and ask about their days and be so relentlessly, boringly normal that neither of them would suspect a thing. And while I smiled, I was going to quietly build a case so complete, so undeniable, that when the moment came, there would be nothing for them to argue with. Not a scene. A checkmate. The next morning was the first real test. I came downstairs and there they were. Daniel at the counter with his coffee, Emma at the table in her robe, hair still damp, exactly like the photo. I felt something twist in my chest, sharp and hot, and I smiled through it. "Morning, you two," I said, kissing Daniel's cheek, squeezing Emma's shoulder as I passed. "Emma, you want eggs? I'm making some." "You're an angel," Emma said, beaming up at me. An angel. Sitting at my table, in my house, glowing with the confidence of a woman who thinks she's already won. "I try," I said, and I cracked the eggs into the pan, and my hand didn't shake at all. That was the morning I learned something about myself I never knew. I was good at this. The peacekeeper, the quiet one, the woman who absorbed everyone else's chaos. It turned out that all those years of hiding my own feelings to keep everyone comfortable had given me a terrifying skill. I could smile at people I was planning to destroy, and they'd never see it coming. Here's what I understood that neither of them did. They thought this was about a marriage, about a man choosing one sister over another. To them, the story was simple and old as time. The husband falls for the younger woman. The wife gets pushed aside. Everyone moves on. But that's not what it was about. Not really. It was about a company, and I owned the majority of it. Let me explain what that actually meant, because this is the fulcrum that everything turned on. Meridian Creative was, on paper, worth a great deal of money by year 3. We'd been approached twice about acquisitions. We had contracts, assets, a client roster, an office lease, equipment, cash reserves, and the ownership structure, the one I'd insisted on in that lawyer's office 3 years earlier, was ironclad. 60% mine, 40% Daniel's. Which meant Daniel could not sell the company without me. He could not take on major debt without me. He could not remove me, dilute my shares, or restructure ownership without my signature. He needed me. Legally, structurally, completely. And here's the part that made my blood run cold once I really thought it through. He knew that. Daniel was not a stupid man. He was reckless with his heart, but he was careful with his money. There was no way he was planning to leave me, to blow up our marriage for my sister without a plan for the company, which meant somewhere, somehow, he was already working on a way to get me out. That thought was what turned my quiet grief into cold focus. Because suddenly, the affair wasn't the biggest threat. The biggest threat was whatever he was planning to do to my 60%. So a few days later, I did something that felt completely natural for a co-owner to do, and completely invisible as an act of war. I logged into our company's financial systems, all of them. As the majority owner, I had every right to. I'd built half these systems myself, and I started reading. At first, everything looked normal. Payroll, client payments, vendor invoices. But I wasn't skimming anymore. I was hunting. And on the third night, after Daniel and Emma had gone to bed, separately, performing the lie for my benefit, I found it. A new legal expense. 3 payments over the past 2 months to a law firm I didn't recognize. Not our usual company lawyer, a different firm. One that specialized, I discovered with a few minutes of searching, in corporate restructuring and shareholder disputes. My husband had hired a lawyer to figure out how to take my company away from me. I sat back in my chair in the dark home office, and I felt something I hadn't felt in that entire terrible week. I felt awake, because now I understood the full shape of it. This wasn't just a man cheating with my sister. This was a man who was going to leave me for my sister and try to strip me of my grandmother's legacy on his way out the door and make it look legal. They weren't just planning to break my heart, they were planning to rob me. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, something in me went very still and very clear. I stopped being sad. I picked up a pen. I pulled a fresh notebook out of the desk drawer, a plain one, nothing anyone would ever notice. And on the first page, I wrote a single word at the top: evidence. Then I started making a list, everything I needed, every document, every screenshot, every transfer, every message. The name of that law firm, the dates on the hotel receipts, the photos, all of it. If Daniel wanted to make this a legal war, then fine. He'd hired one lawyer. I was about to become my own. And the beautiful thing, the thing that made me almost smile there in the dark, was that he'd handed me months, weeks and weeks of comfortable, oblivious time, because he thought I was asleep down the hall. He thought he was the only one making a plan. He had no idea he was already losing. What followed were the strangest 4 months of my life. To everyone around me, I was Claire, same as ever. Calm, warm, dependable. I made dinner, I laughed at Daniel's jokes. I went shopping with Emma and let her try on dresses and told her which ones looked best, while she stood there in front of the mirror wearing clothes I was, in a very real sense, paying for. But underneath that surface, I had become someone else entirely. I had become a collector. Every single day, I gathered. Quietly, methodically, leaving no trace. I learned to screenshot Daniel's messages when he left his phone unlocked on the counter. And he left it unlocked often, because why would he worry? I was just Claire. I forwarded the important ones to a private email account he didn't know existed, then deleted the evidence of the forward. I photographed the receipts before returning them to his pockets. I documented the withdrawals, the transfers, the payments to that restructuring law firm. I built a timeline, a real one. Dates, amounts, names. And I want to tell you the hardest part, because it wasn't the work. The work was almost soothing. It gave the pain somewhere to go. The hardest part was the tenderness, because they didn't just betray me coldly. They were sweet to me. That was the cruelest part. Emma would hug me and say I was the best sister in the world. Daniel would pull me close on the couch and tell me he didn't know what he'd do without me. And I understood, finally, why they were so affectionate. Guilt and insurance. The nicer they were to me now, the more shocked and reasonable they could act later when they broke the news. We tried so hard. We didn't want to hurt you. It just happened. They were building their story too. A story where they were good people caught in an impossible situation, and I was the sad, oblivious wife they'd let down gently. So every hug from Emma, every kiss from Daniel went into my notebook too. Not as evidence for a court, but as fuel. Every act of fake tenderness burned away one more ounce of the guilt I might have felt for what I was about to do. There was one night that nearly broke me. It was Emma's birthday, and like the fool I apparently still was in some corner of my heart, I threw her a dinner. I cooked her favorite meal. I bought her a gift, a delicate gold bracelet she'd admired weeks earlier. She opened it, and she cried. Real tears. She threw her arms around me and said, "You've always taken care of me, Claire. Always. I don't deserve you. I don't deserve you." And over her shoulder, as she hugged me, I locked eyes with Daniel across the room, and he was watching us with the softest, warmest smile. The two of them, so moved by my love for my sister, so touched. I hugged Emma back, and I looked at my husband over her head, and I smiled at him. And in that moment, all three of us were performing. All three of us were lying. The only difference was that I knew all three of us were lying. That night, after everyone went to bed, I added one line to my notebook. Not evidence, just a note to myself so I'd never soften, never waver, never talk myself into forgiveness in some weak 3 a.m. moment. I wrote, "She said she doesn't deserve me. She's right." Then I closed the notebook, and I slept better than I had in weeks. By the second month, I knew I couldn't do the legal side alone. Daniel had his restructuring firm. I needed someone better. And I needed someone who would keep it completely silent. So I did something I'd never done in my marriage. I made a major decision entirely on my own, and I told no one. I found her through an old college friend. Her name was Diane, and she was a corporate attorney with a reputation that made even confident men nervous. 25 years of experience in shareholder disputes and high-conflict divorces where a business was involved. She'd seen every trick a spouse could pull to hide assets or steal a company, because she'd spent half her career catching them. I met her in her office on a weekday afternoon, having told Daniel I was at a spa day. I brought my notebook, my screenshots, my timeline, everything. Diane listened to my whole story without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against the desk. Then she said something I will never forget. "Claire, I've done this for 25 years, and I have to tell you, most people who come to me are a mess. They're still emotional, still hoping, still half defending the person who's destroying them. They give me feelings. You just gave me a case." She tapped my notebook. "This is the most organized documentation I have ever seen a client walk in with. You didn't just find out he was cheating. You've built a paper trail proving he's been misusing company funds, hiring personal legal counsel to attack a co-owner, paid for out of company accounts, while conducting an affair with a person living in a home you're financing. Do you understand what you have here?" "Tell me," I said. "You have leverage," she said, "an enormous amount of it. He thinks he's setting a trap for you. He has no idea he's walking into one." We talked for 2 hours, and Diane laid out the reality, cool and clear. Because I held 60%, Daniel had almost no path to force me out. His restructuring lawyer had probably already told him the same thing, that his options were limited, expensive, and unlikely to work without my cooperation. Which meant his real plan was probably to pressure me emotionally, to wait until he'd broken my heart and I was too devastated to fight, and then offer me a generous buyout that was really a fraction of what my shares were worth, and get me to sign it while I was crying and desperate to escape the pain. He was counting on my grief to make me cheap. "He wants you weak when you sign," Diane said. "So the entire game is simple. We make sure that when the moment comes, you are the calmest, strongest, most prepared person in the room. And he's the one who's blindsided." She leaned forward. "Here's my advice, and it's going to be hard. Don't confront him. Not yet. Let him keep thinking he's in control. We prepare everything quietly. The valuation, the buyout terms in your favor, the documentation of his misuse of company funds. We get it all ready and waiting. And then you choose the moment. A moment where he has no time to react, no lawyer at his side, no chance to spin a story." I thought about it. And then I said the thing that had been forming in my mind for weeks. "I know the moment," I said. Diane raised an eyebrow. "Our wedding anniversary," I said. "It's in 2 months. Daniel always throws a big party. Everyone will be there. Our friends, our employees, both our families. He loves an audience." I paused. "So do I, apparently. I just found out." Diane looked at me for a long second, and then, slowly, she smiled. "Claire," she said, "I think you and I are going to get along just fine." I walked out of that office and into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in 2 months, I didn't feel like the past sleeping down the hall. I felt like the future, and it was mine. I just had to smile for 2 more months. I could do 2 more months. I'd been smiling my whole life. The next 2 months moved on 2 levels at once. On the surface, my life looked like a slow, warm slide toward an anniversary celebration. Daniel started planning the party with real enthusiasm, booking the venue, a beautiful private room at a restaurant we loved, the same one where he'd proposed. He invited everyone, our closest friends, both our families, the entire Meridian team. "I want to celebrate us," he told me one night, his arm around me on the couch. "Everything we've built. I want everyone to see it." And I said, "That's perfect. I want everyone to see it too." He had no idea we were talking about 2 completely different things. Underneath the surface, Diane and I were building. We got the company professionally valued, quietly, through a third-party firm, framed as routine due diligence that a majority owner might request. The number came back higher than even I expected. Meridian was worth serious money now, which meant my 60% was worth serious money. And it meant that whatever lowball buyout Daniel was preparing to slide across the table to a grieving, broken wife would have been robbery on a scale that genuinely shocked Diane. "He was going to try to buy your majority stake for a fraction of this," she told me, sliding the valuation across her desk. "This isn't just an affair, Claire. This is financial predation. He targeted your emotional weakness as a business strategy." She was right. And with every document we assembled, the last soft, forgiving part of me went quieter and quieter. Diane and I prepared 3 things. First, a complete, court-ready file documenting Daniel's misuse of company funds, the payments to his personal restructuring lawyer, drawn from company accounts, to plot against a fellow shareholder. That alone was a serious breach of his fiduciary duty. It was, as Diane put it, a very sharp knife. Second, divorce papers. Clean, prepared, ready to file. With my documentation of the affair attached, the messages, the photos, the hotel receipts, establishing exactly who broke the marriage and when. And third, this was the masterstroke, and it was Diane's idea. A buyout offer. But reversed. Instead of Daniel buying me out cheap, we prepared an offer for me to buy him out. At a fair price, based on the real valuation. Generous, even. Diane insisted on generous. You want it to look reasonable to everyone watching, she explained. When this is over, the story people tell should be, Daniel betrayed her, and she still offered him a fair deal. You come out clean, untouchable. He comes out as the man who cheated with his wife's sister and got exactly what he had coming. And not $1 he could complain about. I stared at those papers for a long time. He gets to keep his 40%'s worth, I said slowly. In cash. And he loses the company, the marriage, and me. And, Diane added quietly, if he's stupid enough to refuse, we file the fiduciary breach documentation, the affair evidence, everything, and he risks losing far more publicly in a fight he can't win. The offer is the golden bridge. Most people take the bridge. I thought about my grandmother. This money is your freedom. Don't ever let anyone take your freedom. They'd tried to take it, and I was about to take it back, plus interest. There was one more piece. One more thing I asked Diane for, and she raised her eyebrows when I did. I want it all documented in a way I can present, I said. Simply, cleanly. I want to be able to lay it out in front of people and have it be undeniable in about 60 seconds. Present it to who? She asked. I smiled. Everyone, I said. The morning of our anniversary, Daniel handed me a box. I was at the vanity doing my hair, and he came up behind me with that easy grin, set the box on the counter, and kissed the top of my head.
For tonight, he said. Open it.
Inside was a dress, deep green silk, cut beautifully, exactly my size. Expensive. The kind of gift a devoted husband gives his wife on their anniversary. I lifted it out of the box, and I felt the silk run cool through my fingers. And I thought about the fact that he had picked this out, taken the time, chosen the color, the size, imagining me in it. The man who was leaving me for my sister had bought me a beautiful dress to wear to the party where he'd planned, I was almost certain now, to eventually break my heart in front of everyone we knew. Because that was the other thing I'd come to understand about Daniel over those months of watching him. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to be seen leaving me the right way. He wanted the narrative. He wanted our friends to say, later, well, these things happen, and Daniel handled it with such grace. I looked at him in the mirror. It's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. It was.
Wear it tonight, he said. I want everyone to see how beautiful my wife is. My wife. Still. For now. Because it still served him to have one. I will, I said, and I smiled at him in the glass. I promise. Everyone's going to see. He grinned, satisfied, and went to get ready. And I sat there holding the green silk, and I made a decision. I would wear it, not because he asked, but because there was something perfect about it, something that felt almost like poetry. I would stand up in front of every person in that room, in the dress my husband bought me, and I would take back my life. Let him see me in it. Let him remember, for the rest of his life, that the last time he chose an outfit for me, it was the armor I wore to end him. I got dressed slowly. I did my makeup carefully, and as I clasped my grandmother's necklace at my throat, the one real piece of jewelry she'd left me, the one thing besides the money, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I finally understood what I'd been doing for 4 months. I hadn't been suppressing my feelings. I'd been forging them. Grief into patience, rage into precision, heartbreak into a plan so clean it could be laid out in 60 seconds and leave no room to argue. Downstairs, I heard Emma laughing, and Daniel's low voice, and the front door as the first guests began to arrive. I picked up my clutch. Inside it was a single, slim folder. Diane had asked me 3 times if I was sure I wanted to do it this way. Publicly, all at once, with no warning. I was sure. I took one last look at the woman in green silk. She looked calm. She looked kind. She looked exactly like the Claire everyone expected. Only I knew what was folded inside her clutch. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered to the necklace at my throat.
Let's go get our freedom back. And I walked downstairs to my anniversary party. The party was beautiful. I'll give Daniel that. The private room glowed with candlelight. There were flowers everywhere, white and green, tasteful, expensive. Our friends filled the space, laughing, holding glasses of champagne. Our employees from Meridian clustered near the bar, proud to be invited into the founder's inner circle. My mother was there, Daniel's parents, and Emma. Emma in a gorgeous red dress, radiant, floating through the room like she owned it. Which, in her mind, she nearly did. I watched her from across the room. I watched her touch Daniel's arm a little too easily. I watched the two of them share a private glance that no one else caught. But I caught it, because I'd been trained by 4 months to catch everything. They thought this night was a celebration of a marriage they were secretly ending. And I let them think it, right up until the moment I didn't. I played my part perfectly. I hugged our guests. I thanked people for coming. I laughed at the right times. I was warm, gracious Claire, and everyone told me how happy we looked, how lucky we were. What a beautiful couple. 10 years, my mother said, cupping my face. You two are an inspiration. We really are, I said, and I meant it in a way she would understand only later. Then, near the end of dinner, Daniel stood up and tapped his glass. Of course he did. Daniel could never resist a moment. He wanted to give a toast. The room quieted. Everyone turned. And my husband stood there in his perfect suit, glass raised, smiling the smile that had made me fall in love with him a decade earlier. I want to thank you all for being here, he began. 10 years. It's hard to believe. When I met Claire, and he told the story, our story, how we met, how we fell in love, how we built Meridian from nothing at that little kitchen table. He was a good speaker, charming, warm. Half the room had tears in their eyes. I sat there in my green silk dress, and I listened to my husband tell the story of our love to a room full of people, knowing that he was planning to end it. Knowing that the woman he actually wanted was sitting 8 feet away in a red dress, watching him with shining eyes. He was performing our marriage like a eulogy he hadn't told me was happening. And I just want to say, Daniel finished, turning to me, raising his glass higher, that everything I have, everything I've built, I owe to this woman. To Claire, my partner in everything. He smiled. To my wife. To Claire! The room echoed. Glasses lifted, warm eyes everywhere. And Emma. Emma raised her glass too and called out clear and sweet, to my sister, the best woman I know. The whole room awed, and I felt it land, that final blade. She toasted me, in front of everyone. The best woman I know. The performance was so complete, so shameless, that a small, cold part of me almost admired it. Daniel looked at me expectantly. It was the moment for the wife to stand, to dab her eyes, to say a few sweet words back, to be the grateful, adoring partner.
So I stood up, and I picked up my clutch, and I smiled. "Thank you, Daniel," I said. "That was beautiful. Really. You've always been so good at telling our story." He beamed. "I think I'd like to say a few words too," I said, "if that's all right." "Of course," he said, gesturing grandly, sitting down, handing me the floor. Handing me the floor. Bro, he handed me the floor. I looked around the room, at all those warm, expectant faces, at my mother smiling, at Daniel leaning back in his chair, relaxed, proud, at Emma glowing in red. And I began. 10 years is a long time, I said. You learn a lot about a person in 10 years. You learn who they are when things are easy, and you learn who they are when they think no one's watching. A few people chuckled, thinking it was a joke leading somewhere sweet. 4 months ago, I continued, my voice perfectly calm, I found a receipt in Daniel's jacket. A hotel. Champagne and strawberries, ordered at 11:40 at night. The room shifted. Small. Almost nothing. But I felt Daniel go very still. I didn't say anything, I said, because I'm the calm one. Everyone here knows that about me. Claire keeps the peace. So instead of making a scene, I checked his phone that night. I let that sit. And I found messages, months of them, to a contact saved only under a little heart emoji. Daniel's face had begun to change. The color was leaving it. I'm not going to read them all, I said gently. I'll just read 2. The first one, from Daniel. When are you finally going to tell her? I hate pretending at breakfast. Silence. Absolute silence. My mother's smile had frozen on her face. Breakfast, I repeated softly. Now there's only one woman who has breakfast at my table every morning. And slowly, I couldn't help it, I turned and looked at Emma. Emma had gone white. The glass was still in her hand, but her arm had dropped to the table. The second message, I said, turning back to the room, came with a photo. I won't show it. I have too much dignity for that, even now. But it was a picture of my sister, in my guest bed, in the sheets I made up for her when I took her in after her breakup. And Daniel wrote underneath it, my future, not the past sleeping down the hall. Someone gasped. I heard a glass set down hard. I was the past, I said, sleeping down the hall. In my own house, that I paid for, while my husband and my sister planned their future in my guest room. Claire, Daniel started, half rising. I'm not finished, I said, not loudly, but he sat back down, because there was something in my voice now that no one in that room had ever heard before, and it stopped him cold. Here's the part that matters, I said, opening my clutch. Because a cheating husband is an old story. This one has a twist. I drew out the slim folder. While I was smiling and making his coffee, Daniel was using our company's money, company funds, to pay a law firm that specializes in shareholder disputes. He was paying lawyers to figure out how to force me out of the business my grandmother's money built. The business I own 60% of. Around the room, our Meridian employees straightened in their chairs. This part they understood in their bones. This part was real to them. He wasn't just going to leave me for my sister, I said. He was going to wait until I was heartbroken and weak, and then buy my majority stake for a fraction of what it's worth, while I was too devastated to fight. He targeted my grief as a business strategy. I looked directly at him. Didn't you, Daniel? He said nothing. He couldn't. His mouth opened and nothing came out. So, I said, and I set the folder on the table in front of him.
I had my lawyer prepare a few things. Inside this folder are 3 documents. The first is divorce papers, already prepared, citing adultery, with all my evidence attached. The second is a complete file documenting your misuse of company funds and breach of your duties as a co-owner. The kind of thing that ends careers and reputations and can be very, very expensive. I paused. And the third, I said, is a buyout offer. From me to you. At a fair price. Generous, even. I'm offering to buy your 40% of Meridian, in cash, at full valuation. You walk away with real money and your name intact. I leaned down, just slightly, so only the front tables could fully hear the sweetness in my voice. Or you refuse, and I file the second document, and we let a court and every person you respect learn exactly how you spent our company's money. Your choice. You've got until Monday. I straightened up. Smoothed the green silk he'd bought me. Thank you all for coming, I said to the frozen room. It really has been 10 unforgettable years. Then I picked up my champagne, took one small sip, and set the glass down beside the folder. And I walked out, calm, unhurried, past my speechless mother, past my ashen sister, past 100 wide eyes. For the first time in my entire life, I didn't smooth anything over. I let it burn. I made it to my car before my hands started shaking. Not from doubt, from adrenaline, from the sheer force of finally, after 4 months and honestly, after a whole lifetime, saying the thing out loud instead of swallowing it. I sat in the driver's seat in the parking lot, gripping the wheel, and I breathed. And then, I'm not proud of this, but it's true, I laughed. One sharp, disbelieving laugh, alone in the dark. Because he'd handed me the floor. He'd literally gestured me up in front of everyone he wanted to impress, and I'd taken it and burned his whole world down with a calm voice and a slim folder. My phone started buzzing before I even left the lot. It didn't stop for 3 days. Daniel called 11 times that first night. I didn't answer. Diane had been very clear. No contact directly. Everything goes through me now. So I forwarded his number to her office and turned my phone face down. Emma texted. A lot. I read them because I wanted to understand what she thought was happening. The first ones were panic. Claire, please call me. It's not what it looked like. It was exactly what it looked like. Then they turned to justification. We didn't plan this, it just happened. You don't understand how it was between you two. Then, and this is the one that told me everything, they turned to anger. You humiliated us in front of everyone. That was cruel. That's not who you are. I read that one twice. That's not who you are. And I realized that was the whole problem, wasn't it? For 34 years, who I was had been defined entirely by my usefulness to other people. Calm, accommodating, quiet. The one who absorbed everything and never made anyone uncomfortable. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me that made their betrayal convenient. I typed one reply to Emma, the only one I ever sent. You had breakfast at my table every morning while planning to take everything I have. Don't tell me who I am. Then I blocked her number. That night I stayed in a hotel, a nice one, on my own money, wearing a robe that no one had bought to manipulate me. And I slept, bro. I slept like Daniel had slept that first night. Deep and even. The sleep of a person with nothing left to hide. Monday came. Daniel took the deal. Of course he did. Diane had built the Golden Bridge exactly right. He'd spent the weekend, according to his own lawyer, learning just how bad the fiduciary breach file really was, how much it could cost him, how public it could get, how completely I held the majority that made his position hopeless. Fighting meant risking his money, his reputation, and any chance of walking away with his name intact. The buyout was, genuinely, the best outcome available to him. Diane had made sure of that on purpose. Always give a cornered man a clean exit, she told me. Desperate people do damage. Give them a door, and most of them walk through it quietly. He walked through it quietly. We met once, in Diane's conference room, to sign. His lawyer on one side, Diane on mine. Daniel looked terrible, hollowed out, gray, 10 years older than he'd looked giving that toast 4 days earlier. He signed away his 40% of Meridian. He signed the divorce papers. And when it was done, he looked up at me across that table, and for a second, I saw the man I married. The one from the little kitchen table, back when we had nothing but each other and an idea. "I never thought you had it in you," he said quietly. And I understood, finally, that this had been the real problem all along. Not the affair. The affair was just the symptom. He'd married a woman he thought would never fight back. He'd built his whole betrayal on the assumption that I was too soft, too accommodating, too nice to ever make him pay. He'd underestimated me completely, and he'd mistaken that underestimation for love. "I always had it in me," I said. "You just never gave me a reason to use it before." I picked up my copy of the signed papers, and I left him sitting there. That was the last real conversation Daniel and I ever had. As for Emma, my sister moved out of my house that week. She had to. It was mine, entirely mine, and now everyone knew it. She and Daniel didn't last, by the way. I heard it fell apart within a few months. Turns out, a relationship built on betraying the person who loved you both isn't the most stable foundation. Who could have guessed? My mother took a long time to understand it. At first, she was upset with me, for the scene, for the cruelty, for breaking up the family. And I let her feel that, because I was done managing other people's feelings for them. Then, slowly, as the full picture sank in, the affair under my roof, the plot to steal the company, all of it, she came around. She called me months later and said, "I raised you to keep the peace. I think I raised you wrong. I'm sorry." That one I cried at, just a little. It's been 2 years now. Meridian is entirely mine. I run it my way, and it's doing better than it ever did when Daniel and I ran it together. Partly because it turns out I was always the one holding the real value, and partly because a company runs better when its owner isn't quietly heartbroken every single day. I hired well. I promoted the people who deserved it. And every one of those employees who sat in that room and watched me lay the folder on the table, they stayed. Every single one. Because they'd seen exactly who I was when it counted. I kept my grandmother's necklace on my desk, where I can see it while I work. "This money is your freedom," she told me. "Don't ever let anyone take your freedom." They tried, and I took it back. All of it, without raising my voice once. So let me tell you what I actually learned, because I think it's the reason this whole story matters, and not just a story about revenge. For most of my life, I thought being calm meant being weak. I thought keeping the peace meant swallowing my own needs so everyone around me stayed comfortable. I thought being the nice one was who I was, instead of a role I'd been assigned and had never questioned. I was wrong. Being calm isn't weakness. Calm is a weapon, the sharpest one there is, when it's backed by clarity and courage. The night I found that receipt, my rage wanted to scream. And screaming would have felt good for 10 minutes and cost me everything. Instead, I got quiet. And quiet gave me 4 months to build something screaming never could have. The people who betrayed me weren't defeated by my anger. They were defeated by my patience, by the fact that I refused to give them the emotional explosion they were braced for, and instead gave them a folder they couldn't argue with. Here's the real lesson, and I want you to actually hear it, whoever you are, wherever you're listening from. Kindness is not the same thing as weakness, and the fact that you're gentle with people does not mean you owe anyone the right to walk over you. You can be warm and have a spine. You can be the nice one and be nobody's fool. The moment someone mistakes your kindness for a weakness they can exploit, that's the moment you're allowed to show them, calmly and completely, exactly how wrong they were. I gave my whole heart to two people who saw my softness and thought, she'll never fight back. They were the last two people who ever made that mistake. I wore green silk to my anniversary, the dress my husband picked out, and I walked out of that party a free woman, in the outfit he chose, on the money my grandmother left me, into a life that was finally, completely my own. And I have never slept better.